Please welcome the Vice President of Customer Solutions from PLM TrustLink, Don Durm. Don, welcome. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day today. And I'm happy to hand things over to you. I'll be in the back here monitoring any questions that come in from the audience. But for now, the show, my friend, is yours.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for that introduction. And welcome, everybody. It may be good morning to you, and it may be good afternoon to you. So I extend those greetings to you. So my purpose today is really twofold, really is to educate and disturb. Okay, so why disturb? Disturb because most of us want to stay in state. You know, you don't want to do anything about what you just heard. So I want to give you some things to think about and go back to your companies and your respective supervisors and have a conversation, because we're going to take a look at what foods are on the food traceability list. We're going to talk about the FSMA rule itself. And I was very specific. I didn't really make my own little comments. So I lifted a lot of it directly from the rule itself. And then we're going to take a closer look. There are in excess of 520 plus conversations that go on in their attempt to explain the rule itself. And then we're going to talk about the new era of a smarter food safety, and that's really where FDA is headed. I am not an attorney. When you look at these things, I'm not here to necessarily interpret everything for you. This is the initial look at the rule itself, and to really take a look at it, where we are going as a country with our food traceability plan to create trust and transparency throughout the supply chain. So my first stir for you today is the actual rule is just about 38 pages long, but the actual rule, when you print it with all those conversations in there for comments and then FDA's responses, is nearly 600 pages long. And so we're going to go through some of that. We are definitely not going to hit everything that you may want to hear, but we're going to take it a step at a time and just go through the process here and take a look at what's going on. So let's talk about what the 204 rule actually is. It's enhanced traceability for just certain foods, and we'll go over that in just a moment. But again, lifted directly from the rule itself, the food traceability rule requires persons, and that means a company and people who pack, manufacture, or hold food or process foods on the food traceability list. And they must maintain certain key data elements, okay, and those are KDEs throughout the rule that they talk about, for certain critical tracking events, or CTEs is what they'll call that, CTEs. And this framework forms the foundation of effective and efficient tracing of food. So, special note, I know that there are some restaurants out there, some concepts out there. Am I included in this rule? And the answer is yes, you are. So the definition, again, lifted directly from the rule itself, specifies that restaurants are entities in which food is provided to humans, such as cafeterias, lunchrooms, cafes, bistros, fast food establishments, food stands, saloons, taverns, bars, lounges, catering facility, hospital kitchens, daycare, and nursing homes. What you may not know is that pet shelters, kennels, and veterinarian facilities in which food is provided to animals is also included. Retail food establishments, those that are grocery stores, you are also included in this rule, and we'll talk about what your role and responsibility is, but grocery stores, convenience stores, vending machine locations are also included. And then any retail establishment that with certain farm operations, so we're looking at roadside stands, would also be included within the rule itself. So what's on that rule, Don? You know, what is actually on that enhanced traceability list, what they look at? So cheeses are on that, other than hard cheeses, so all those soft cheeses, shell eggs, nut butter, if there's not a kill step involved, so your peanut butter cracker would be included in this particular case. If you would look at a coconut, that would also, so coconut butter would also be included on this if it does not have a kill step to it. So fresh cucumbers, herbs, leafy greens, whether they're cut or not, and fresh, melons, peppers, sprouts. Sprouts particularly, there's some additional requirements for that, for the seeds itself and what field they were grown in and things like that. Tomatoes, tropical tree fruits, so like things like mangoes. But there's some nuances there that you get into as far as tropical tree fruits. So citrus would not necessarily be included in that one. So you see, you really have to dig a little bit deeper into what we're looking at and what we're talking about. So fresh cut fruits and vegetables would be included in this list. If they're frozen, they are not included on the list. So ready to eat deli salads from the old proposed rule, there's a little bit of change there. So if you have a meat salad, let's say a chicken salad that you made, that is not necessarily going to be included under this enhanced traceability because FDA says that USDA regulates that part. So if you have fresh cut celery that is put in a meat salad, and that's the example that they use, you would not have to do a transformation event for that for the enhanced traceability. You would have to follow that celery all the way up until the point where it is transformed and put in there, but nothing beyond that. So they're not going to step over that one. So fresh and frozen seafood, which is fin fish, there are some exceptions to those. We just don't have time to go through those at this point. Crustaceans, mollusks. What FDA says, they're going to take a look at this list about every 5 years is what they're saying. And they will update that list at that time. It does not mean they won't do it sooner or later than that. But what they've said is if they put an additional product on this enhanced traceability, they will give you 2 years in order to come in compliance with it. If they take something off, it will be immediately once they post it. Okay. So let's talk about the requirements in supply chain. So this is lifted directly from FDA's website, and they have some presentations that you can look on there if you want to look. And this is a produce example, and we're going to go over one more and take a look at fresh caught tuna, wild tuna for us today. So the farm has certain responsibilities they do. The harvester has to do certain KDs, so the farm has to figure out what fields they pick this in, up in. There's nothing necessarily that has to be done as far as, originally they were looking at doing traceability lot codes, to be able to do it at the farm level, the harvester, and the cooler, but that is now gone. What they have to do is you have to look at, harvesting KDEs, and then if you had any cooling KDEs, those key data elements, that all has to be kept within the particular company. Now, it's not until you get to the initial packer and you get to the produce processor that those KDEs will then have to be created and create a traceability source lot code in there. So then once the initial packer gets done creating that traceability lot code, they then have to create a shipping KDE and to the receiver. And if that is directly to a food processor or to a distributor, they have to do the receiving KDEs for that. So then if the food processor transforms that product that came from the initial packer, so let's say you're taking lettuce, you're taking carrots and cucumber and tomato and putting it in something to make a salad that's transportable. Now you transform that. So now you get to link those particular KDEs and that traceability source lot codes into the new product that you just did and create one traceability lot code at that point. Once you're ready to ship it, you then have to put a shipping KDE to that. And we'll go through all of these. Again, lifted directly from the rule itself. And then the distributor has to create receiving KDEs. So there's many distributors out there I see. And then you have to also put a shipping KDE on that. And then you have to deliver that to the retail establishment. And that is a grocery or a restaurant as defined by FDA. All right, so let's just take fishing vessel. I don't think there's too many on there, so we'll just go very quick on this one. So the fishing vessel was originally going to have to create a traceability lot code, and that is gone away to now where it's the first land-based receiver. If you are the first land-based receiver, if you are a distributor and you get something, you're the one that's going to have to create the traceability lot code. So that first land-based receiver creates those KDEs and then creates a shipping KDE. If you're sending that on to another food processor, and if they transform it, they have to put those transformation KDEs and then create these shipping KDEs. Push that over to the distributor. Distributor does the receiving KDEs. And these are all the data that you're currently getting. A lot of it, most of it, I would say, most of you're getting most all this data. It's about the transfer. What is different for you a lot of times in the distribution is that now you have to deliver that to the restaurant. And if you're a restaurant, you have to maintain these receiving KDEs also as in a repository. So let's talk a little bit about traceability lot code requirements. We're talking about that. So basically, it means that it's a descriptor, and what you're looking to is identify the traceability lot code from a particular firm. You must assign a traceability lot code to the food traceability list. If you do any of the following, if you're an initial packer from any agriculture, raw agriculture. The other one, if you perform the first land-based receiving off a fishing vessel, you have to create the traceability lot code. Also, if you transform a food, and we'll talk a little bit about this later. So if you're a distributor and you go in and you basically commingle something. So you have two cases of tomatoes, and you want to make one case because there's some rottens or they're too green or whatever it may be. So you're basically doing a transformation event. And when you do that, you are the one that must assign the traceability lot code in there. Now, if you receive food from the farm, let's say, that is maybe exempt, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, you are the one that's going to have to assign the traceability lot code, and we'll talk a little bit about what your responsibilities are for there. And then these are requirements, these critical tracking events must be assigned to the traceability lot code. All the key data elements that we've been talking about, included on that traceability lot code, must be linked to the relevant traceability lots. Okay, so now we're the initial packer. The initial packer or a processor. We've got them up at the top. Again, these are clipped directly from FDA's website. So these are the ones that have to create that traceability lot code. And so what's my responsibility if I have to do that? And again, and we'll talk about that in a minute as far as transformation. So you have to put the commodity, the variety of the food that was received, the date that you received it, the quantity of the unit measure received. So it's 200 pounds, it's 75 bins, it's 10 cases, whatever that might be, you bring that in. Then the location description for where you received it on the farm that was harvested. So that's the information you're gonna have to get from the harvester. If you are an initial packer or processor in this case. For food produced in a named field or a growing area, that must conform to what the grower has. So the mapping of that and that location needs to be kept on file with them, but you're the one that's responsible for putting that as the traceability lot code. For anything aquaculture, so it's the pond or the pool or the tank or the cage that it came from, where you harvested it at. And again, you as a processor or initial packer, you're the one that needs to pull that forward in there and with your relationships. So what is the additional information you have to have in there? You have to have the business name, the phone number of the harvester, for the date of the harvesting, the location description, if it was cooled. If you have a cooling process, that has to be on there. The date of the cooling, the traceability lot code that you assign. So now we're getting to where you're actively here, but you're relying on data basically from your farm and from your harvester and from your cooling. So now you're putting the traceability lot code source number on there. So the product description that you're calling it, the quantity of measure. Now we're doing 25 cases, 25 reusable plastic containers, 200 pounds. So it's 100 tanks. Let's say it's a lobster, okay, that you're doing. So that'll have to be on there. the location description of where you initially packed it, and any traceability lot code source reference, and then the date of initial packing that has to be on there. So what do I do if I'm when I'm doing the shipping, my shipping requirements? So if you're a distributor and you're in the middle of that supply chain and you're pulling things in and you're pushing things out, you're going to have your shipping requirements and your receiving requirements. So any FDA says the shipping is any event in which you arrange for transportation from one location to another. And this is going to be kind of important for you too if you have intercompany moves, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So you have to have the traceability lot codes, all the information we just talked about, and then the quantity that you're actually shipping. So 6 cases, 25 reusable plastic containers, and so on. The product description for the food itself, the location description for immediate recipient of the food, so where it's actually going to go, and that's the end. And so we'll talk a little bit about if it goes to a cross dock a little bit later on. But from A to B, the location description for the location for which you ship the food, the date you shipped it, the location descriptor for the traceability lot code source, and the reference document type. You must provide this in electronic, paper, or written form. Okay, it's what you can provide to your stakeholders in a particular format that's agreeable to both of you. Information of this section to the immediate recipient for each traceability lot that you ship. So in food distributors that are distributing to restaurants and to grocery stores, typically you're shipping out not a whole lot out to them. You're doing partial lots of that particular number, and we'll cover that in just a bit. So receiving requirements. So receiving for FDA is an event where food in the supply chain is received from one other than the consumer. So receiving event is anybody except the consumer. So if you are providing food to the consumer, you do not have to pass the information on to the consumer. Okay, so it's really up to the restaurant and up to the grocery store, the retail food establishment. Other than that, you are not required to push this information to the consumer itself. So for each traceability lot of food on that traceability list, you must maintain the records for the traceability lot for the food you received, the quantity and unit measure. So I got in 100 cases or whatever it might be from this particular lot. The product description of the food itself, the location description for the immediate source, the location description for the food that was received, and the date you received it, the location description and traceability lot source, and the reference document. Now, this is a lot, but if you are a restaurant, you are included in this portion of the rule itself. So it's very important that you pay attention to this part of it, because this is what you're required to do. So again, we go back to the transformation for just a moment. So any transformation is a commingling, and like we talked a little bit earlier, is making a fresh salad or something like that. That's commingling different ones, pulling those traceability lot codes, creating a new one. So you're transforming it at that point. If you're repacking, so if you are a distributor and you took the tomato event, like I just talked about, you have to take, you are then required to put a food traceability lot code on there. Or if you actually relabel it somehow, you must put a transformation and do your own traceability lot code on there. So what do you need to link it to the new traceability lot code? So you pull those in, you put your new traceability. So in this case, I've got 2 tomato cases, and I'm making one, so I have to link those two to the one, and then I'm gonna do the location description where the transformation actually happened. So a food distributor, will have to have a program where they can create traceability lot code sources, and then any kind of references that you need, and then the date it was actually transformation was completed. Okay, so today's date, I did this. The product description of the food, so it is this particular tomato, cherry tomatoes, whatever that might be. And then the quantity and user measure, I made 1 case. and then the reference document that you have on file. So what are some other things that I must have? I must have a traceability plan. Many of you already have a traceability plan, probably much more detailed than what's required under the rule. But if you're subject to the rule, you must have a description of the procedures you use to maintain your records. So you have to have the records, but you just have the procedure here, including any format, location of where these records are stored. A description of the procedure you use to identify the particular food on the food traceability list that you manufacture, you process, pack, or hold. And this is true for all the stakeholders in the supply chain. And then a description of how you assign a traceability lot codes if that's applicable to you. So if you're a food distributor and you do some type of commingler or combining at some point, you have to have a program on how you create this traceability lot code, how that works. And then a statement identifying a point of contact of persons regarding the traceability plans. The original rule is going to require you to pass all that information, name, your fax number, whoever has one of those anymore, email address, and then that had definitely some privacy issues connected with it. So that's kind of gone. There's a number of things that are gone from it. Just briefly, if you grow or raise food, you have to have really a location on where you harvest the particular foods, where it's grown at those areas. The same thing for the aquaculture farms. With tanks or particular foods in, you have to have that as part of your traceability plan. So how long do you have to keep these records? You have to keep these records, the traceability plan, for 2 years on file. If you change it, so if you change it today's date, you have to maintain the old record traceability plan for 2 years, and then you have your new one, and then you go on. 2 years from now, then you can go ahead and get rid of the old traceability plan. FDA is asking you to take a look at this traceability plan every 3 years is what is suggested in the rule. So what are some important timelines, okay, and what are the requirements? So all records under this rule, okay, are required to be produced to FDA within 24 hours after request. So that is your requirement to be able to do it. So they want to look at traceabacks as quickly as possible. So unless you're exempt from the requirement, you must have an electronic sortable spreadsheet containing all the relevant information that must be provided to FDA within 24 hours. So what records must you maintain? You must maintain all these records for a period of 2 years. So the question may come up out there is, hey, I'm a restaurant. I need to keep this record of this tomato lot code that came into my restaurant for 2 years? The answer is yes. Rule becomes enforceable January 2026. The original proposed rule talked about 2 years. They're giving an additional 1 year, so it's 3 years. The rule has actually become law of the land today, but they will not enforce it. That's why I put enforceable until 2026.
Hey, Don, sorry to jump in here. Our audience is very engaged. Quite a few questions have come in, so I wanted to steal a moment here to ask you one, and then I'll give the rest of the questions after you're done with your comments. But earlier on, you stated, of course, restaurants have to receive and be a repository for KDEs, the key data elements that are the foods that are on the traceability list. If I'm a restaurant, this is not what I do, right? This is not my core competency at all. Can they outsource this to a third party as a service, or is this something they need to keep internal?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And FDA specifically draws that out and says that, yes, you can use a third party to be able to bring this information, be the repository. What they are going to require is that you be able to get to it within 24 hours. You meet all these demands. If you are required to put in an electronic sortable spreadsheet, you must provide that to them. If you're not, then you must be able to provide the documents. And they even still say, hey, we may ask you to put it in a sortable spreadsheet anyway once we start to request this. But yes, you can do that. The caveat here is that whoever's maintaining those records for you, you're the one on the hook for it, okay? So if FDA does some type of enforcement on you, it will be on you, not your third party that you had asked to be the repository for that, okay?
So select a good third party is your is your note.
Yeah. So, make sure you audit your third party for sure, because you're the one that's going to be held responsible for it.
Right.
That's a great question. Hey, thank you for the question.
And just so you know, there's Don, I got like 4 or 5 more. I'm going to let you get back to your comments, but hey, audience, keep them coming in. As much time as we have at the end, we'll answer as many of those as we can. So Don, back to you.
Awesome, much appreciated. So exemptions on the sortable spreadsheet. So if you're a small RFE, so retail food establishment or restaurant, okay, if you have $1 million in sales and less, you are exempt from the sortable spreadsheet. Does that mean you don't have to keep the records? No, you still have to keep the records. And that's based on a 3-year rolling average, okay? So they use 2020 as the number, but they also talk a little bit, it's a 3-year rolling average is what they're looking at. So small farms that are 250,000 per year in sales, again, on a 3-year rolling average, they don't have to keep on the sortable spreadsheet. There are a ton of other exceptions that are there for, size of business and stuff. We just don't have time to go over them here, but I just wanted to give you that. So let's take a closer look at the food traceability list. And this was a question I got in last week, I believe. And so this is lifted directly from their worksheet where they list the vegetables and they give some detail and stuff, and say vegetables other than leafy green, fresh cut, includes all types of fresh cut vegetables other than leafy greens. Vegetables listed at 112.2 paren A, paren B are exempt from the requirement under the rule. So I get this question about, hey Don, are fresh cut mushrooms included on this list? So you go Google mushrooms, and mushrooms are scientifically classified as a fungus, and really they don't qualify, and they're not considered a vegetable according to Google. All right. So then I go up and I look at where is 112.2 paren A, paren 1, and that's actually the food code. And so, yeah, it's not even in the rule. So you have to go to another rule. And so I pull the food code up, I look under that. And then this is produce that basically is rarely consumed raw. So you got beans, things like that, sweet potatoes, eggplants, just different things like the water chestnuts, things that are not necessary. Mushrooms is not on that list. So now you go over to USDA and you look at their website, and they say that a mushroom is considered a vegetable to them because of the nutritional value that it has. And so, I'm not telling you this is the rule that mushrooms are on the list, but it's something that you need to take a look at and ask questions. If you are using and have fresh cut mushrooms, do I need to be pulling the data in for this, for these KDEs and the CTEs that FDA is requiring? I'm going to probably hallucinate that this would be included on this particular list because USDA and FDA do basically a reciprocity agreement. They do have some agreements between the two departments, the two agencies. And so that would be my guidance in here. So again, check with your attorneys, check internally, maybe ask FDA, and take a look at something like this. So let's talk a little bit about retail and restaurant exemptions, or what's some happenings up there. So you purchase directly from a farm and your retail food establishment. The only thing you're going to be required is maintain a record documenting the name and address of the farm and the source of the food. So if you're an individual restaurant and you get something, directly from the farm, you got to maintain that particular record for 180 days. So, that would be your requirement if you're getting something directly from the farm that's on the food traceability list. Again, not all foods, just the ones we're talking about. So one of the common things within restaurants, and especially QSRs and things like that, is store-to-store transfers, or maybe you're a restaurant and you ran out of lettuce, or your distributor you forgot to order the lettuce from your distributor, and so that didn't come in. So you want to run down to your local retail establishment and go ahead and pull buy some lettuce there, so you can provide your customer with what's on the menu itself. So the retail establishment or restaurant that makes a purchase must maintain a record. One of the things they're going to allow you to do is use a sales receipt, and you document the name, the product purchased, the date of the purchase, and the name and address of the place of the purchase. And that has to be within your records according to what FDA. So it needs to be put in your repository. So initially, they were going to require you to do all this stuff and get all these KDEs and critical tracking events and your source lot code. So they understand this is a very common practice, and they're going to allow you to do this. So there is some relief there from the original proposed rule to be able to come over there and do something in that vein. So distributors to retail and to restaurants. So here's part of this 520 plus that's in here, and yes, it did take me. I had to go down and get some more ink when I ran this. So I kind of want to get you a feel, and this will all be, these are lifted directly out. I wanted you to, at least when you get this and you have that opportunity to review it, you can actually go to the comment, read it for yourself. Okay, there'll be some gaps, but read it in context of what you're having to deal with. And so I would suggest that definitely read it. It's kind of mixed up in a lot of places, and where they talk about food distributors and restaurants and other supply chain actors. But so comment 342. Many comments asserted that the proposed rule would impose a case level tracking. So this is really important for distributors. It would, and this is what the comments of distributors, it would require distributors to maintain and send shipping KDs linked to a specific traceability lot code of the products in each shipment. As we know that retail and restaurant distributors, they may get in a pallet of something, and maybe there's one lot code number on there, but you as a restaurant only want 1 or 2 or 3 cases of that particular product in your store at the time, because you're getting twice a week deliveries. So their comments were especially in situations where a mixed pallet is being shipped or a smaller quantity of products are being sold. Comments claim that tracking like this would, the only way to know that would be at the case level sent to the customer. So here is FDA's response. Now, I'm not trying to explain FDA, I just want you to see what is in the rule itself, or at least those comments, and where you kind of get some insights in there. So their response was, we disagree with the comments that the rule requires case level tracking. Okay, so they go on to explain about how things can be, commingled, just like what they were talking about. It says subpart S, which is the rule, does not require case level tracking in such situations, and we think the final rule provides adequate flexibility for firms to decide how to manage these situations depending on their individual practices. But if you go later on in the same response, it's multiple paragraphs, is conversely, if any entity, such as the distribution center, receives smaller traceability lots of the same product, and therefore needs to combine multiple lots into a single shipment, the records for that shipment event would need to be specific to each traceability lot. So if you've got 3 or 4 different types of products that have different traceability lot codes, could be different kinds of products, could be the same product, but has a different, you still need to trace what traceability lot code case, they're saying lot, okay? However, they say this too does not constitute case level tracking, because records would not need to be kept uniquely identifying each individual case, but you would have to identify each lot going into that particular customer. So, my interpretation of that is, I think we're tracking case level if we're going in directly to restaurants and retail. Now, that's where I differ. You may read a little bit different, and maybe your attorney does too, but it seems to me that you still would have to have that with traceability lot went into that particular customer themselves. So a distributor that has a transformation event. We talked a little bit about this, about commingling some tomatoes and stuff. So one comment was whether transformation KDs are required for breaking a master case product into smaller units. So response 307 really talks about, hey, if you take a pallet full of tomatoes with the same lot and you just take one of those cases off and you give it to someone, that's not a transformation event, okay? Because that's traveling through the supply chain with that traceability lot code number on it. So you don't have to do that. But if you repack or repackage this, that would constitute transformation under the rule. So again, simply breaking down a pallet doesn't constitute a transformation event. If a pallet contains cases associated with different traceability lot codes, and this is where I go back to, we're really kind of talking about tracking at the case level. No, but yes, when you get down to the restaurant or the retail food establishment, if the pallet can contain cases associated with different traceability lot codes, so different lot codes on the same pallet, the shipping records would use those traceability lot codes to indicate which traceability lots were shipped to which location. So that would indicate to me, I really need to understand which case went to which customer, or multiple lot code numbers went to which customer. So it's not just, if I'm delivering 3 cases of tomatoes and each one of those had a different traceability lot code, I need to ingest that, pass that on, and for the understanding. So another question we typically get is intercompany shipments, okay? So some of the comments suggested intercompany shipments would be exempt from the rule. So response number, again, this is comment 243, you can go onto yourself, and then response 243 was, we declined exempt intercompany shipments. Okay, we conclude that effective traceability requires that records be kept when a product changes physical locations, okay? Regardless of whether the shipper or the receiver are under the same ownership, the way they're looking at this, if you go from one address to another address, and that's what they revise it to, that constitutes a shipping KD that you'll have to create, and then a receiving KD at the other time. So if you are doing intercompany shipments, and it may be just down the road, and still within maybe your property, but it has a different address, they're going to have to do it according to what the rule discusses. So another one you might get out there is cross-docking. So this is comment 244, and they suggested that cross-docking, is just a normal event that happens within shipping a lot of times, and they wanted to be an exemption from that. So in response 244, they said, hey, we've decided that cross-docking, we're not going to exempt it because we think there's enough information out there in the rule that we understand, that you should understand. So they give some examples. This is thus in a cross-docking situation where food is from A to B, but it may go to X for a certain period of time. They're not going to require X to be part of, so you don't need to create a shipping KDE and a receiving KDE, okay, and then another shipping KDE when you ship it out, okay? That's not going to be required. So you always have to look, and then later on, you always have to look at the howevers, okay? Same 244. To determine whether a food has been received at point X and subsequently shipped to point B, we would consider factors as how long was the food held at X? So they don't really give you a timeline on how long the food was to be held before they consider it where you need to create a shipping and a receiving KDE. And whether the food was held under the temperature control conditions that differed from transportation. So you kind of really have to understand, am I shipping it to a place that the dock is going to be held the same temperature? Again, just lifted directly. This is just what my interpretation is. And then whether it was taken in inventory, I think that's pretty transparent. If you take something in inventory, you need to create a KDE on that. But cross-docking is a question that we get from time to time also. So then comment 171 really says, if I'm a distributor, okay, how would I be able to identify if a product in a farm is exempt what we would want to do is, have some type of certificate on file, at least the farm be able to tell us that. Their response was, hey, here's the qualifications, fully exempt, and they don't have to keep any records, okay? So they don't have to keep any records, they're fully exempt. So then they say, however, again, I always tell you, however, should be raise the antenna. Foods on the food traceability list produced by exempt farms are not exempt throughout the supply chain, nor are distributors who receive food from exempt farms, okay? Now you have to comply with section 1.13, 3.0, and 345, which sets forth those records. They anticipate that supply chain partners would communicate all these things along the supply chain. So I'm a distributor now, and what does 1.135(b) say? For each traceability lot code that I receive in, who is exempt, I now have to create the traceability lot code. I must assign that, okay? So you will, if you're a distributor or you're receiving it. Now, if you're a restaurant or a retail food establishment, this doesn't apply to you, okay? The quantity of the unit of measure that you're going to do, 6 cases, whatever, the product description of the foods, things we talked about earlier, the location, again, you can read this, the date you received it, and then a reference document. Those would be your responsibility. So what does FSMA, the 204 future, look like? One of the comments suggested that, hey, let's just include everything. And I wanted you to see this because response 101 or 100 really was, hey, we're not really going to include other foods, so it's only if it's on the food. However, as stated in the preamble of the proposal, we believe that applying to all foods to records keeping would be beneficial. And so that's kind of where they're going. So really, let's talk a little bit about FSMA, the new era of a smarter food safety. I think most of all of you know Frank Yanis. He's very visible. He's the Deputy Commissioner of Food Policy and Response. The new era of a smarter food safety is really four core elements: smarter tools for prevention, food safety culture, and you doing these rules creates that food safety culture. New business models are really worried and looking at from the food retailer, so from the restaurant to the consumer, from the grocery store to the consumer, and then a tech-enabled supply chain. So let's hear from Frank exactly what a tech-enabled supply chain looks like to him.
And I wanted to just ask, if I could, do you think you may actually lean in on some of those areas that you had blueprinted in March as you think about a release later this year? And I'm putting you a little bit on the spot, but if you can't answer, that's fine.
No, I'm definitely interested in leaning in. Clearly, right now, we're still dealing with the pandemic, and it's largely all hands on deck, although, as I mentioned, we have other people working, but we're very interested in leaning in, and I'm always interested in accelerating anything that would be good on behalf of the American people. Traceability, let me just tell you a little bit more about that. You mentioned traceability equals transparency. I agree with that. We're after transparency, not just traceability. But one of the things that's also beneficial, Bob, is that once you start digitizing supply chains, and in my instance, I'm very interested in food, you can not only do what we call track and trace, but you can monitor. And we've seen some proof of concept. I've been involved with some of these in my day, where you can not only then have provenance, but you can monitor, let's say, temperature conditions. And you can move from a system that's just first in, first out to first expired, first out. You can move from a system where I'm not really sure if there was temperature control throughout the supply chain to one where I know they maintain cold chain compliance throughout its duration. And so I believe it's not only transparency, but I think it's this idea that we're going to be able to monitor food as an asset as it travels through the supply chain, or for any other product that GS1 is interested in. And so at the end of the day, I think the agency is responsible for regulating establishments and regulating food products. And this new digital world that's emerging is good for compliance, safety, and trust, and that we now, rather than just writing rules on how facilities should operate, or writing rules and having some weak paper-based records to see how products travel through the supply chain, and you can never do that in real time. We now have the ability to digitize assets, whether they're establishments and food, and give everything a voice and be able to monitor it almost in real time. And that's an exciting world from an efficiency, from a sustainability, and from a safety standpoint.
So interesting words from, and that was from GS1, and thank you GS1 for allowing me to use that. And but that's from Frank Yarnes. And so I don't know if you know it, but if you go to FDA's website, I don't know if you knew that FDA has a podcast, and Frank Yarnes talks a little bit about the new era of a smarter food safety. It's downloadable and you can listen to it. I encourage you to do it. I've given you a link here that you can go in and listen to those. So Frank really talks about tech-enabled traceability. That's been his mission for over a course of 30 years. If you don't know his history, Walt Disney World, Walmart, he was the main stakeholder that instituted blockchain for lettuce because of all the different recalls that were happening. So he's looking at a tech-enabled traceability in whose ideal his time has come. And he really envisions this like almost like FedEx tracking, that you can take a look on your phone in real time and real visibility. You can see food tracked and traced. And he even talks about temperature monitoring also, about how that could potentially do throughout supply chain to be able to look at that. And he's really advocating that a tech-enabled food traceability cannot wait, that it needs to proceed forward. So the sponsors for this one is, for this webinar has been PLM TrustLink. And really what they do is they look at a tech-enabled supply chain to be able to do that. So they're a turnkey IoT management platform. They're not a WMS. They work independent. They can feed information in there. They work in a touchless supply chain ecosystem that provides real-time condition monitoring, track and trace capabilities, and analytics for any of your temperature control products. So they work off of three different simple principles. Mark your product with a digital marker, and that could be any of the things, current ones you're using or new types of markers that are coming out today. Digitize your food with those unique markers, and then be able to utilize that throughout the supply chain ecosystem. But just like what Frank was talking about. From that, you could look at all those critical tracking events. The KDEs could all be then transferred to a workbench where you could see all those things and give you some type of data analytics and stuff. And then eventually you can extend that out to any type of consumer experience that you might want to show. So how does that really look, and what are some of the things that we've done? TrustLink has also worked, to digitize the case. Again, we're not talking about in the rule, we're talking about lot numbers in multiple cases, but you digitize the case, you digitize the pallet, you digitize the trailer load, and then there's kind of a Russian nesting dial that can actually happen to where you can put things up and back and put it back together again, reassemble it to something different, much like what happens at a food distributor to a restaurant or to another retail food establishment. And in this way, we can see how the operation, you can track it inside your facility, you can track it exiting your gate to the distributor, and ultimately to the restaurant to be able to push that. So what does that actually look like? A printable smart label is then applied with temperature that would link the individual case to the specific customer order on the pallet. The pallet is then loaded on a refrigerated trailer. The dock porters will ensure the right cases are going into the right trailer, and that's indicated by the green flashing lights that you see. If a pallet then enters that trailer, not match the manifest for the route, flashing red lights would be on the top of the portal, indicate you have an error, and then that loader could rehabilitate the pallet utilizing the right product, the right destination. Your product is then loaded and transported. At the place of delivery, there's really no need for each individual case to be scanned, just a simple wave of a hand scanner, and that product is checked in against the customer's order, and then you're correctly received in time and date and location, and all the KDEs and critical tracking events that you're required can be passed on. The operator can receive that inventory just as quickly, saving them time and money in receiving that product, so no more hours. And so all this data can be then transferred to you and to the customer, in this case showing a beautiful guacamole in there. So what does this do? Actually create some business opportunities? Yes. With this food safety, higher traceability, you can actually help reduce costs. So order fulfillments, inaccurate inventories that you might have, any type of temperature excursions, labor. Labor is a real big thing in warehousing these days. How can you hire less skilled labor? I was just talking to a distributor yesterday, 140% turnover rate in their warehouse. How do you help with that? Technology like this, right product on the right pallet, in the right trailer, to the right customer. Reduce risk, any non-compliance, any recalls. Once it's scanned, if it gets recalled, you'll be able to see that, or any type of holds. Increase sales, promotion, stockouts. You really give origin and authenticity, and of course, always to enhance your brand, which you look for. So I want to give, I see that there's a couple of folks out there from GS1. GS1 would be a great resource if you're looking at, if you want to connect with me, this is my email address. I'm also on Twitter, so Don Durm Speaks, and then also on LinkedIn. And if you want to give me a call or send me a text message, we may not get to all the questions. And if there's, if you want to send something over to me, I may not know the answer right away, but I'll definitely, again, I've read this a few times. I can definitely circle it for you and get over those pertinent information to you, for you and your folks to make that determination. So thank you very much. Charlie, I'm ready.
Great questions that have come in. If you don't mind, we got a couple minutes here. I'm going to do them rapid fire for you, Don. So keep your answers short and sweet.
Sure.
When you get a chance, can you ask if FSMA 204 applies to food trucks?
If they're a certain size, you have some exemptions. So please send me a note, because I will send you that particular directive. So in some instances, yes, but it depends on the amount, okay?
For a school district using a commissary model, do they have to do the shipping traceability?
Yes. If you create something, you transform something, if it's transforming, you're going to consume it. I'll have to take a look at that, Charlie. I'll have to take a little bit deeper dive on that one.
Okay. I know these are,
yeah,
you're getting these questions as a la minute here, so I understand if there's to follow up. Another question about schools. How does this requirement apply to a school district that purchases produce from local farms and then distributes it to multiple schools?
Right. You are still under those requirements, and you have to look at the farms that you're getting, if the size of the particular farm, are they exempt? And then are you having to create that traceability lot code? So that's going to be really up to the size and what you're actually doing. So I don't have enough specificity there to really give you a good answer.
If the distributor keeps the info on what lot code they sent us, do we need to keep it also?
Yes, the answer is yes. If you're relying on your distributor to keep all the KDEs and all of the critical tracking events of the traceability lot code, you are, you can make them your third party, but you will be held responsible for providing to FDA. So if they say that they can't give that information to you, or they don't have it, or maybe you switch distributors and they got rid of the information, you are the one on the hook for it. So, you like I said earlier, it's up to you to, vet, to maybe even take a look at what to audit your third party person that's doing it. Yeah.
Right. Last question before I give some IFMA updates here. What if a food service establishment purchases from a retail location or a cash and carry? Will they get the certificates of traceability?
Yeah, you don't need it if you're it was a question of food retailer.
Well, let's say a restaurant is sourcing food from a restaurant depot, for example.
Yeah, so if you're buying it from a restaurant depot, you would have to keep the receipts available. Okay, the repository for that, my reading is for 2 years. You'd have to keep that receipt and the time, date, location where you purchased that at.